18, amendments to the county bond ordinances and bond program update, and ordinance number 2015-10. These, and then same under similar on item 19A and B, and ordinance number 2015-11. B is termination of the intergovernmental agreement with the town of Savarita. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address us on these items at this time? If not, what's the pleasure of the board?
Move approval of those items and those accompanying ordinances.
And close the hearing?
And close the hearing.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Miller.
I demand that we divide the question, item 18 from item 19.
Okay. Okay. Item 18, what's the pleasure of the board?
Move approval.
And close the hearing.
And close the hearing.
Madam Chair.
Motion and second to approve. Supervisor Miller.
My concerns on this item are that, number one, we're moving out some projects from the 1997 road bonds out until 2022. There are 6 amendments to extend those implementation periods, and the cost cited is by reduced HERF funding. We're using HERF monies to pay for these transportation projects for new and road widenings, and it's extending out the time frame. We're going to be almost 25 years into this, and we already have this issue with road repairs. The other issue I have with this item is expanding the scope and implementation for Canoa Ranch to fund additional renovations. We're hearing about these cuts from the state. We all know we have these cuts at the state level with the budget cuts, yet we're willing to...
That's the next item.
This is item 18.
Well, but I'm talking about 19 with...
I'm talking about the bond amendments, the ordinance and bond program update, and these are the items cited in number 18, where you go through each of the items, and I just summarize them in the staff report. And I'm just talking specifically to these various amendments that you have in the staff report. So these are really the concerns that I have, is that these are ongoing and they're expanding the scope. And it's my personal opinion that we should not continue these out into 25 years, especially the 1997 transportation bonds, which my understanding is are somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 million outstanding, of a $350 million bond from 97. So those are my comments on item 18.
Thank you. Mr. Huckleberry.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board. The staff report is written for 19, so that's why the Canoa Ranch discussion is mixed in with in the staff report. With regard to the HERF bonds, it's quite simple. If we were to issue and try and spend the additional $80 million, then our debt service would go up even more, and we'd have even less money for road maintenance. So if we have to push this off into the future, we have no option because it's a revenue bond. And so that's, we're just facing the reality of having declining revenues from HERF and additional continued sweeps from HERF. The legislature was supposed to restore $30 million that sweep this year. They did not do that. That would have been another $2 million. Yes, we had pledged to restore $30 million of the sweeps.
But are they sweeping this year?
Yes, absolutely.
Additional monies?
Yes. Okay.
But I guess my whole point of this is, why are we even going to bother issuing these bonds? Why don't we just retire them altogether?
We're Madam Chair.
And I know this is up to the board.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Supervisor Miller, we're not issuing any more debt. We're amending the implementation period, pushing it out further, in the hope that someday we would have the ability to actually issue those revenue bonds. And right at this point in time, it's off into the future and nobody knows.
I hear that point. I guess just my point is that I think we should just completely retire them and not have them hanging out there in the future. And that's just a point. I know others won't agree with me, but this is going to continue. You talk about sweeping from the state. This is going to continue sweeping our road repair money for these 1997 bonds, even if it's out into the future. So it's going to be even longer before our road repair, our HERF funds are completely allocated to road repair.
I just remind Supervisor Miller that these were voter-approved projects.
Well, so are a lot of projects, and the board votes to move monies around, which a lot of these amendments are for.
It's extremely rare that we do that, actually.
Yeah, well, it's definitely happening today.
Because we
Supervisor
completed most
Carroll.
of these projects.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Carroll.
I'm concerned that this is just laying out there as misinformation at this point. Mr. Huckleberry, these voter-approved HERF bonds, are you accepting that we're sweeping money from road repair by funding these HERF projects in the future? That's what I thought I heard was said, and I just don't agree with that. That mitigates out the entire objective here of building these roads. So if it's not road building, maybe we should talk about reviewing these projects at the supervisor's request.
Madam Chair, could I correct that?
Let him finish.
Excuse me.
He has the floor.
So what I'm saying is, please correct what I feel is misinformation. This obviously is a board prerogative today. I'd be happy to delay it because I just think that when you mitigate out the concept that this is road money going towards road work as sweeping from the road funds and construction of roads, I just want you to clarify for us, Mr. Huckleberry. Can you do that?
No, I think Supervisor Carroll's question is, HERF revenues have traditionally been used both to improve capacity as well as for maintenance. I think that is Supervisor
In
Carroll's.
addition to these bonds, I think that
Mr.
very clear to me.
Yes, Madam Chair and members of the board, in the 1997 HERF revenue bond question, the county heard absolutely nothing about road repairs. In the 2004 general obligation bond questions, the county heard absolutely nothing about road repairs. Same thing in 2006, and same thing in the 2006 RTA election. HERF revenues are paid for from HERF bonds are paid for from HERF revenues. Hence, they subtract from the total pot of money available to operate, maintain, build, construct your highway system. And so, the point is that had we not had the 97 HERF revenue bond issue, we'd be hearing from a lot of people today about highway capacity, not highway maintenance. These ordinance amendments do absolutely nothing to excavate or to cause more difficult the road repair problems we have because we're extending the periods. We could certainly retire the debt and retire it all and say we aren't going to issue anymore, but at this point that's not necessary because we aren't issuing it. At the point we decide that we should be issuing HERF revenue bonds, the board can make the decision as to whether or not to do that at that time.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Miller.
I'd like to make a couple of points. I agree with Mr. Huckleberry's point. However, we are using HERF, which is designated for road repair monies, to pay for 1997 bonds, which are for capacity improvements and which those bonds were voted on. And I do get that the voters approved funding those with HERF repair monies. I don't think they understood that. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that we're expanding a project scope for the Ina Road Tire Facility to allow remaining funding to partially close the Tangerine Road fill. I don't think the voters voted on that. We're expanding the scope and implementation for Canoa Ranch to fund additional renovations. The voters didn't vote on that. We're extending implementation schedule, which is something the voters did vote on. We're amending and reallocating bond funding from the town of Sarita, open space, back to Pima County. That's the point that I am making, is that we do vote to move monies around, and we do vote to change the scope of what we're doing with bond monies. And that is clear in these bond amendments, and this was included in the background material for item 18. So when someone says that we seldom move the monies around, these are perfect examples of, in fact, doing exactly that. And the HERF revenues being used to pay off bonds were part of that vote. The voters approved it. I understand that. I believe it was a mistake, and I understand the fact that we need capacity improvements as well as road repairs. But as long as we continue these, and I understand we're not going to be issuing these for some time, and I hope that we don't. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Valdez and Mr. Huckleberry.
Madam Chair, and let me start off, and I'm going to mix 18 and 19 as a point that I'm trying to address, deal with both. Let me start off by asking Mr. Huckleberry a question on whether or not it is true. Mr. Huckleberry, the point that you are making in terms of the decrease in HERF revenues has prevented an ability to issue debt and be able to keep the road preservation program where it is today. So basically, the question is this: if we were to try and issue the debt that is in the 1997 bond monies, it is then that we would be sweeping funds from road preservation to fund that. Is that not correct?
Madam Chair and Supervisor Valdez, yes.
So by amending this particular ordinance, we are preventing road sweeps locally because of what was done legislatively. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, let me deal with the Sahuarita. Mr. Huckleberry, I believe we have a request from the town of Sahuarita to amend said ordinance. Is that not correct?
Madam Chair and Supervisor Valdez, yes. And we have a very strict and structured process with regard to bond amendments.
So
It includes a public hearing.
So we are not haphazardly changing this ordinance. We are being asked by the jurisdiction which it affects, that happens to be in 3 of our districts, to make this change, correct?
Madam Chair and Supervisor Valdez, yes.
I believe that some of the other issues that have been addressed were voter approved in a concept, and they are being furthered, and that I believe is a term of art, that they're furthering that concept of what the voters voted on. So indeed, while an allegation has been made that this is not what voters approved, it is indeed what voters approved. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Valdez, yes, in each specific case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Roll call. This is on item 18 in ordinance number 2015-10. To approve.
Supervisor Carroll.
Aye.
Supervisor Elias.
Aye.
Supervisor Miller.
No.
Supervisor Valdez.
Aye.
Chair Bronson.
Aye. Moving on, motion carries 4-1. Moving on to item 19A in ordinance 2015-11, as well as 19B, termination of the IGA with the town of Sahuarita. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Valdez.
move to close public hearing and approve item 19A and B in ordinance number 2015-11.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Discussion? Any further discussion? Roll call.
Supervisor Carroll.
Aye.
Supervisor Elias. Supervisor Miller.
No.
Supervisor Valdez.
Aye.
Chair Bronson.
Aye, motion carries 4-1. Moving on again to hearings, development services, items 20 and 21 in ordinances 2015-12 and 13. What's the pleasure of the board? I have no speakers.
Close the public hearing and approve item 20 and 21.
Second.
And ordinance numbers accordingly.
Motion and a second. Objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to the addendum agenda, Supervisor Miller.